Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good, very good. I'm very pleased to introduce our guest, my friend and Israeli Lio Cloud. We wanted to bring you in, going to school in the U.S. or aspiring to, but from Israel, and you were there October 7th during the Hamas attack. We actually had to delay the start time because you just had, kind of a bomb signal go off. So, tell us about what's going on over there. What was the mood right after it happened, and how are things even today?
Well, I live in the center, and not a lot of things happened here. In the center, I mean, they were two suspected terrorists. We still don't know that managed to reach my city, but honestly, Holland is such a rough place that I bet those terrorists got here, took a look around, and said, "Hey, yeah, we're not doing it here. Let's go somewhere else."
Well,
Uh,
so I mean, how often are the sirens going off?
Gee, it's really random. I mean, if Hamas would be nice enough in order to just get a schedule going and not just do it whenever they feel like, I'd really appreciate that. But really random because, I mean, there was one just now. There used to be like two a day, three a day in the first few weeks of the war. And recently, there's been like once every 2 days, once every 3 days ish.
What
You
do
know,
they
And it's
call that protection system they have? Is it Iron Dome or something like that?
right.
Yeah, well, that's the way to translate it, even though it's kind of a bad translation. But yeah, that's basically it. Kipat Barzel.
How effective is that? Does it shoot down almost every missile?
90%, I believe, but you still need to go to the bunker because the debris that can get you.
Okay. Right after 9/11, I was actually hosting a radio show 20 years ago. And I think they'd already sent anthrax as well. I was coming in to do the show, and I swear, I mean, I remember my paranoia. I half expected someone to take a shot at me when I was heading into the radio station. I mean, is that sense there after going through a terror attack?
Yeah, yeah, everybody's paranoid. The more you watch the news, the more paranoid you get. And it's not unusual to have people in Israel who will watch upwards of 5, 7, even 10 hours of news a day. That's
Yeah,
a
that
lot.
happened after 9/11. I mean, that's when we started getting the scroll under the screen. It was just like, they didn't stop broadcasting for a week.
Oh, here it's been like that for forever, but now, it's really going in full force. And, surprisingly, well, for foreigners, it's surprising. For Israelis, not at all. A majority of the coverage is about the family of the people who are kidnapped.
Okay.
And they interview them, and honestly, I think it's kind of disrespectful. It kind of feels like they're making a reality TV show out of it,
You know, I have
which,
a I have a theory about all that because we've lost a lot of respect for our government and our media, and we don't believe what they tell us half
yeah.
the time. So I think some media they have to go to like the people on the ground who are actually affected by these events and then tell their stories, and then that's how you get people to believe what's going on. One of the problems here is a lot of people don't even believe that there were these killings. There's these denials of
Yeah, it's
of the
nuts.
Hamas attacks. And so, how do you prove to the masses that this is what Hamas really did, and that's what happened?
Well, here we're talking about Israeli media, and it's not the same as in, where you are. Israelis, for the most part, even though they complain about it and hate it, they believe the news. And we watch a lot of news. I think that's one reason everybody was so on board on the vaccination when it came down to Corona. Remember,
Yeah.
it was one of the most vaccine, how do you say, gung ho countries in the world. I mean, we were literally the guinea pigs of some German pharmacist. It sounds bad when I say it like that, doesn't it?
Well, so what? There wasn't a lot of people standing up against the vax in Israel as opposed to America. You're
There
saying?
actually was, and I was one of them, and there was a demonstration outside, but there was zero news coverage about it.
Okay.
And that was a while ago. So that's kind of the news in Israel. Everybody watches them all the time. And I think it's fair to say that they're not exactly concerned about presenting the truth. And they're more concerned about getting ratings, whichever way possible. And it just feels like a big reality TV show. I'm going to give my favorite example. This is something that to us Israelis seems normal, but anywhere else in the world, this would be perverse. It's a thing they do. They get people whose family was kidnapped, they get them on the TV, and they start asking them questions like, how do you feel?
How
Now,
do I think I feel?
yeah, no, well, nobody answers that. They said, gee, I feel really bad. And if you answer, and then they keep prodding, like, I remember I saw this. I was shocked. And the news reporter kept asking the guy, man, I can't imagine the suffering, darkness, and fear and uncertainty you must feel right now. And the guy, who was trying to keep it together, started crying. Obviously, why he would start crying, but the news reporter basically got him to cry on air in front of the entire country. And this was considered nothing, there was no pushback against doing something like this.
Yeah, that's
I mean, if you do that in the US, you'd say, look, they're milking him emotionally for ratings. It's obvious, and it is. But in Israel, we just don't think of it like that because that's not part of our culture because we're Jewish. And William, Scott, I know you're Jewish. William, is he one of us?
he is in spirit.
He isn't. That doesn't count. So,
Actually, I do have a great grandmother who was Jewish, so there is some Jewish in me. But
it's,
I'm curious about your media here. Like,
yeah.
is your media pretty controlled by the government, or is it free, like to just do what it wants?
I don't think it's controlled by the government, but it does really feel like there's some type of establishment controlling it. For example, one thing I follow is a lot of what's going on in China and the, brutal Holocaust level atrocities they are doing on dissidents and ethnic and religious minorities. Um, and nobody talks about it in Israel. Like, you can't find anybody who would talk on the news about the genocide of the Uyghur people, or what they're doing to Falun Dafa, or the Tibetans, or the people in Inner Mongolia, or the Christians. Nothing. Like, our media has a complete blind spot when it comes to the atrocities the Chinese Communist Party commits.
I mean, it maybe they don't want the reaction from China that comes with criticizing them.
Well, obviously, I mean, China apparently has a stake in one of the companies and they own a lot of the infrastructure. So are they controlled by someone? Yeah. I don't think it's the government because if it was the government, Bibi would catch a break. But you know how they're trying to impeach Trump right now and they're doing basically every quasi-legal step they can in order to remove him?
Right.
That's been going on with Bibi. For those of you who don't know, Bibi is the nickname of Benjamin Netanyahu. Everybody calls him Bibi. It's not a joke. He got his name in the army because that's how it is in Israel. And they've been trying to get him out for years, and it failed miserably. At one point, I can't make this up, the prosecution called a witness who was given a plea deal, and after he testified, they wanted to remove him as a hostile witness. No, I'm not. I can't make this up. They get this guy, they make him rat out Bibi, and after he says he comes forward and does his testimony and rats him out more or less, they're like, yeah, no, this doesn't count. Do over,
Well,
doesn't count.
I know you're right. The establishment has been trying to get rid of him. There were some corruption charges. What do you think about how Bibi has done since October 7th?
Well, he's no Winston Churchill, but neither is anyone else. World War II happened. There was this guy, Neville Chamberlain, who said, I brought peace in our time, dumbass. And then they realized that was a bunch of bullshit, and he resigned, and Winston Churchill took over. in Israel, we had, oh, we need a two-state solution, and you make peace with your enemies, and we cannot occupy, and we cannot. What was the slogan? An occupying country can never be free. And what about world opinion? Blah blah blah. Well, we figured out that was bullshit, but there was nobody, Winston Churchill to come to come by, take things over, and say, okay, now let's actually get to business. Does that make sense?
It does, but I mean, just generally, I mean, Bibi has taken a lot of international pressure, and he's just kind of quietly gone in there and, slowly continued to move into Gaza, even to the hospital headquarters of Hamas.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people like to say, "Oh, I'm for Israel," but I think Benjamin Netanyahu is just awful, and it's really, for some reason, Benjamin Netanyahu is portrayed as a radical rightist. He's a moderate center right. Right. He's really a moderate and pragmatist at the end of the day. So yeah.
Well, I'm just going to say, I know some Israelis are upset that he's brought these far right parties into his coalition.
Yeah, far right for Israel.
Well, he did send President Biden packing. So, do you think Netanyahu is serious about ending Hamas?
Yes, because if not, there's going to be so much unrest that it's going to make him, basically end his political career. But if the United States says, okay, you've done enough, it's time to, it's time to go home, you got your revenge, whatever. Because remember, Biden wanted a ceasefire from day one, quickly reversed his position, but now he has this guy Blinken come by and say, oh, we don't want a ceasefire, but we do want you to have a pause for a humanitarian corridor. I'm like, isn't that the same thing? Maybe.
Yeah, so, it's all a bunch of bullshit coming from America, trying to create some sort of a pause, like you say, for this humanitarian aid to get in. And my question is, why should anybody be sending aid to the Gaza Strip? It's run by Hamas. There's a war going on.
But look at those poor children and terrorists.
Can you imagine?
I mean, they don't eat enough food. How can they grow up to be big and strong terrorists? Oops.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine if, people started calling for a pause during World War II, and so we had to send aid to the poor people in Germany?
Well, Japan.
It's ridiculous.
It really is, but again, this is this type of moral relevancy. I mean, not to get too deep into it, you must know about the Castle Act and the Stand Your Ground laws applicable in the United States, but basically everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Right.
These are the type of people who are skeptical about the Castle Act.
Well,
yeah.
I was going to say there was an issue when the attacks first happened that they said, why didn't more Israelis have guns?
Oh, baby. Oh, no. You opened my favorite pet peeve. Israeli gun control. Nobody has a gun here unless you need it for work.
You would think, you hear that everyone's in the army and that, it's a country under constant threat. You would think everyone would be armed.
No. In Israel, if you want to have a gun, that's a privilege. Oh, yeah. And since it's a privilege, you need to prove why you deserve to have one from a certain agency that gives you permission for it. And even if you do, you can only get a handgun. So you can't have a rifle. So, having an Armalite AR-15, nobody has one. So you're in this ridiculous situation where you're forced to babysit an M16, which is basically an AR-15, for 3 years, 2.5 if you're a woman, of your life. And when you become a citizen, you said, no, you're not responsible to have a rifle. Huh?
But is there talk of changing that now after October 7th?
There is some, especially from the person on the right called Naftali Ben-Gvir. I think that's his first name. Ben-Gvir is what everybody calls him. Ben-Gvir has been portrayed as a radical rightist, which, you know, he is very much on the right, but it's the Israeli right. I mean, it's not, in America, he would be probably a centrist.
Okay.
So he is one of the few people talking about it. But otherwise, you know, you get just the regular gun control arguments, like saying, oh, well, you know, what if people use it to assault each other when they get angry? And what about violence in the family? And I'm like, you know, you're talking about all of these hypothetical deaths. Well, we have 1,400 victims who could have stood a chance if not for these stupid laws.
Yeah.
So
how has life in general been affected for you because of the war? Like,
well,
other than
yeah.
having to dive into your bomb shelter every few minutes, what else is going on?
Gee, well, I work as a bus inspector or bus conductor, whatever you want to call it, and there just aren't as many people outside, especially later. So business is slow, even though I get paid by the hour and I don't get bonuses per people I check. I simply stop working at 7:30. Usually 9:30 is when I stop working, because well, nobody's around, and if there's no people, there's no reason to be outside working. So I just say, hey, I'm going home. I'm not doing anything. Right now, they're like, yeah, cool. Other than
Well,
that, everybody's on it. Yeah.
I asked that because you know, terrorists, they want to instill fear into your society, and you know, fear stops you from acting, basically, or sometimes it causes you to retreat, you know, into your home and not go outside. And so I was just wondering, like, how effective is the terrorist tactics at controlling your society and changing it?
It is, but not in the way you would expect. Because this attack, yeah, it made people afraid for a while, and it is made people panic. But other than some, I did see once, you know, okay, so I'm gonna have to explain the context for this, and I'll get back to the main question. I work on a bus. A lot of bus drivers are, you know, Arabs, and a lot of the dispatchers are Arabs. So there's one driver, and he's speaking on the phone with the dispatcher about how to solve a problem with, I think it was the tires. Okay, and he speaks loudly because bus drivers speak loudly, and so do Arabs. Just how it is. And some guy stops his car, blocks the road, gets out, starts filming the driver, and says he's speaking in Arabic. He's speaking in Arabic. I'm like, dude, that's my. I get out of the bus. I start addressing him. So, dude, that's my colleague. You're stopping everybody on the road, and he goes nuts. I subtly convince him to stop blocking the road, and he gets back.
Okay.
So that's the sort of paranoia you get out of people, but that really died down. Now it's kind of a sort of everlasting panic and not knowing exactly what to do. I mean, there's a slogan that says, together we will be victorious," or "together we will win," however you want to translate it. Nobody knows what victory looks like. Because as Israelis, we never saw victory. Like, we don't have any idea what it is. I mean, it sounds pathetic, but we're the only nation that when it wins a war, traditionally, by getting land and repelling the enemy and making him unable to attack us, like in the Yom Kippur War, we go chasing them and begging them to sue for peace, begging them to accept peace. So we win and we sue for peace.
Well,
Does
there's
it make
global
sense?
influences. The U.S. was pushing for peace after the Yom Kippur War.
It's all true. That's all true. But we could have always said, yeah, no. I mean, we could have you're probably going to support us anyways, or we could just defect to the Soviets for a while and the Soviets for a while. And we're only doing what you did in your wars anyways. So who are you to blame us? But nobody thinks that way.
Well, I think
Well,
one of the unique aspects of this conflict
Yeah.
is that you're not really defeating your entire enemy. So like you only defeat part of your enemy at a time, and then you say, look, we just crushed these guys. The rest of you, why don't you like make peace with us? You know, but if you were to like just go out and take out all of the Arab countries that hate your guts,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't have to sue for peace, right?
We'll never do something like that, even though that might actually be capable. I mean, look, if we wanted to, we could just stop Qatar's gas. They don't have oil; they have gas production. It wouldn't be too difficult. I mean, those things are not defended, and Qatar ain't that far away. But we don't think like that. We don't have offense in our DNA.
Well, what about the idea that attacking Iran, as people like Jerome Brook have been calling for, might lead Russia to enter the war?
I mean, it could, but why bother? I mean, Russia proved itself incapable to take over Ukraine, so it's like
Well,
it's another
I
pawn in
mean,
the
there seems to
circus.
be this Russia, China, Iran axis, and
Right.
I'm willing to believe that Russia actually, encouraged Hamas to make this their timing.
Could be. I mean, there's a bunch of what do you call it? Too many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
But I don't think Iran is that much involved, and I'll tell you why. There have been some people from Thailand who have been kidnapped, and the Iranians and the Thais have been talking with each other, and suddenly the Thais have asked Israel to start a ceasefire.
Well,
So that's kind of the extent of the control Iran has in Hamas. Yeah, I mean they're the backers, but it's not that Hamas is going to do whatever they say whenever they say it. So
I'm
So
not
you
sure they may be telling Thailand to call for a ceasefire as a precondition to get hostages home.
could be, but it just shows you how little, I mean, sway they have at the end of the day. Because Hamas still doesn't want to do anything about the hostages. They're playing their cards close to their chest.
wait,
I
are
mean,
you saying that Iran is trying to call for Hamas to cease fire?
No, they're trying to call Thailand to call for a ceasefire on Israel. I mean, a ceasefire when Hamas would be good for them because they get time to recuperate. So
Okay, but that doesn't mean that Iran doesn't like control Hamas, right?
I don't know what it
I
means,
don't know that
but
they control Hamas, but they're allied, and just the difference between Sunni and Shia also, didn't apply when Iran was kind of quietly backing bin Laden.
yeah. Well, they
Um,
both say that they need to kill the kafir, which is everyone who's non-Muslim. So they can, unlike someone we know, they can set their differences aside to complete a goal.
yeah, exactly. Look,
Not anybody in specific, not anybody. Yeah, but
look,
look, they're goal-oriented. At the end of the day, they're goal-oriented in their own way. And if that means putting religious differences aside, they'll pretty much do it. So, yeah.
I mean, let me ask you more broadly
Yeah.
how would you compare Israeli society with the US? How are they the same or different? You mentioned gun control.
Wow.
Are they tend to be center left Democrats in their philosophy?
No, farther than center left. I mean, Israel is one of the most, in many respects, it's one of the most leftist countries in the world. I mean, the unions here control the country. They openly control the ports, which makes everything much more expensive. Um, think of a leftist policy, we probably have it. The Supreme Court controls the entire nation. I'm not exaggerating over this. There's been a big hubbub about judicial revolution, where in reality we're just going to make the courts not overstep their boundaries. In
Right.
reality, there has never been a judge, a bunch of judges with more power than the ones in Israel, even in the Book of Judges, which is history repeating itself. um, Also, Israelis are not goal oriented in a sense. Like everybody knows in Israel, we have the draft. And a lot of people think, oh, you have the draft for, strategic purposes. So you have a big reserve of manpower. No. The draft exists, and people who defend the draft will say the draft exists in order to, mold Israeli society to be more cohesive. So it exists as a form of social engineering, first and foremost, by most people who admitted it.
You say there's no goals. I mean, I've had experiences with lots of Jews that became doctors or lawyers, at least partially due to pressure from their parents. Someone's setting some goals.
No, I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying nationally, we don't set goals and do things. It's not. I'll give you an example. It's not uncommon to have somebody in the same position, work for the same company for 10 years and not receive a pay raise.
Okay.
That sounds ridiculous to you, but that's just how it is here. Or
So
it's kind
you're
of hard to
saying
think.
that that Israel is a very leftist country,
Yeah.
which why don't the American left like Israel? Like we have a lot of progressives here who are basically anti-Israel and they're calling for the ceasefire. Why do you think it is that the American left and the Israeli left don't really get along?
Well, they get along. They do. Like, what's her face? One of the most famous news anchors in Israel goes to the United States constantly and talks with all of the hoi polloi and CNN and basically pushes their narrative once he gets here. I mean, also the same stuff about what do you call it? The gender stuff. That's also kind of a big thing here in certain circles, especially in Tel Aviv, which is near where I live. Why don't they get along? Leftists at the end of the day believe in power. And there's more power with people who don't have any ethics than ones who don't, than ones who do.
And William, you're starting to see American Jews feeling isolated from the left in the wake of the reactions and some of the support we've seen for Hamas. I'm curious, Lio, what thoughts on how people are there responding to global pro-Hamas demonstrations that we've seen?
Well, there was the big reaction as, oh, those are just Arabs or those are just Muslims, which always right or wrong support their own types. Which, yeah, that's kind of true. Otherwise, they're saying like, it's like the old jokes, hey, I'm going to Berlin, but Yossi's a common name. You don't speak Arabic. It's a joke because there's a lot of, but there's that, and there's people talking about, look, it's just a demographic change. We're kind of used to the idea that we're outnumbered by these types of people. But what really, surprises people is all of the quote unquote liberals who support Hamas and go on these things, because that was a big surprise, and also the blatant anti-Semitism they exhibit. For a very long time, in Israel, we were sure that anti-Semitism would come from the right, and it would be somebody with blonde hair and blue eyes and kind of pale, which is kind of like us, but some of us.
I
But
thought that was the dim hypothesis.
no, I think that was religion. But in reality, we kind of feel, look, if somebody has purple-colored hair or is slovenly dressed or tries to make them being a minority look even more exaggerated. It's a type of look like, afro that's too big when you don't have an afro. I don't know if you saw it. Or what do you call it? Or if somebody just has a bigger nose than us, then start watching out. So it's kind of a shift in order how we thought anti-Semitism would be, because for a lot of time we thought anti-Semitism would come from, people who would be like the like the Germans. But yeah, in
Yeah,
reality,
Nazi's more of a spirit than a race.
it actually is, but we kind of didn't pick up on that. Now, Poland, Germany, what do you call it? Hungary, all of the Eastern Europe, Romania, and even Ukraine to some extent, all of the countries that 80 years ago would have been happy to see this are now our biggest supporters. So, things have changed, I guess.
How do you deal with the anti-Zionists? Because it seems like racism is obviously an evil, and it's pretty easy
Yeah.
to counter those types of positions. But what about Zionism, where they say, why should there be this Jewish nation, and why should we support it? And you get those sort of protesters, and how do you respond to them?
It's kind of weird. I mean, okay, so when I was kind of young, I was kind of a leftist, and I thought, yeah, nationalism is kind of bunk. We could all just do without it. Stupid ideas are stupid. The idea is like, what I tell people is, look, the Japanese have a country, nobody bats an eye. The Bulgarians have a country, no one bats an eye. The Irish have a country, the Paraguayans, why should the Jews have a country? And they says, well, you're in somebody else's land. And it explained to them, look, before this, there was the British Mandate, and the Arabs aren't British. And before that, there was the Ottoman Empire. And contrary to what a lot of people think, Turks aren't Arabs. Okay?
That's
So you
true.
told them that, and you're saying, look, if you're already for nationalism, if you're already for Palestinian nationalism, you can't dismiss Jewish nationalism, but say, yeah, there should be Palestinian nationalism in the same breath. It just doesn't work. So you get what I mean? It's kind of stupid on the face of it, because a lot of the resistance to Zionism is saying, oh well, you're nationalistic, which is, well, so are the Palestinian cause. So what gives?
So many people that claim to just care about the Palestinians, they don't care about Kurdish aspirations for a homeland, or the terrible treatment of like Syria of the Palestinians under Bashar Assad's father.
The treatment of the Palestinians, or the Iranians, or the Qatari, or the
Right.
UAE, or Iraqi, even all of them treat them awful. Like, I mean, you feel bad for them at one. I feel bad for them at one.
To be fair, they did try to take over several other countries as well.
Those little rascals.
But but if it seems like the only anger is like people willing to commit violence, and then I think it's mostly fear. I think it's people are like, oh my God, these people are terrorists. Let's just give them what they want and make it go away. And that's where a lot of this comes from.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of it is just run-of-the-mill, unprincipled pragmatism, to the extent like they're making demands, they're moving stuff. They're demonstrating that they're willing to use the force they have. And that is something that unprincipled people respect. Well, respect isn't the right word. That is something that don't know how to explain it. But yeah, that's something they're into.
Well, Rand talked about
a lot of it, I think, sorry, a lot of it, I think, comes down to simple psychological projection. Some of these people who are protesting in their life, they think that you can just, surrender and that will be the end of it. But and so they project that onto this situation and say, well, just stop the hostilities and then we'll have peace. But that's like such a Pollyannish view of how reality is and how wars happen.
People who are against the castle doctrine.
Yeah, they're just projecting their Pollyannish view onto the world, and they don't realize that Israel's up against an enemy with several nations surrounding her, and they all want Israel to just vanish from the face of the earth.
I agree. It's also part of what Rand talked about being the sanction of the victim, because Israel is being punished for the fact that they actually listen to world opinion. No one is making demands that Hamas change, or that they apologize, or that they stop attacking Israel. I mean, they're still calling for more attacks openly.
That's true. It's like, because you listen to us, then we hate you. If you don't listen to us, we respect you. And I think that goes to show the level of contempt they have for the people who swallow their stupid lies. At this point, it's like Victor Davis Hanson says, I have no respect to anybody who's stupid enough to believe my nonsense. When he was talking about Nazi Germany negotiating with Chamberlain's England.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically it. Like, it's all. I mean, I think it's obviously bunk, but the thing is, it's bunk. But Israelis are buying it. It's not like in Israel, everybody is everybody is gung ho over attacking and all that. I mean, there are Israelis still right now who are not sure what we should do after it, and I don't know why. It's a very Israeli type of mentality. We're very, very pessimistic when it comes to military affairs. Even though we're extremely stronger than our enemies, we're still very worried for every little thing. Every little loss, we're afraid of it. Because, here's the thing about the Israeli army. Israelis have a draft, and because most people in the army are basically kids, I mean, let's face it, you finish high school, you go to the army, You don't learn anything. You're basically a high schooler.
Right.
So in that sense, a soldier dying. The only thing worse than that in Israeli society is a middle schooler dying or an elementary school dying. Like whenever we hear news that a brigade or a troop or what do you call it, squad was killed, it's like there's a school shooting. And you're saying, well, wasn't it you guys' idea in order to make all the young people go into the army whether they want to or not? Yeah.
Well,
And obviously makes having an effective army that you can just say, hey, man, we're just fighting. And whatever the consequences are, we're going to have to pay them. It makes it impossible.
I mean,
That's, yeah.
Do you think the draft is counterproductive to a healthy army? Like you say,
Yes.
you don't go on the offensive. You're just like a defensive army. But do you think if there was a volunteer army, you would get the people who are motivated to go on the offensive, and you'd have a stronger army?
I don't know if that would be enough in order to shift the perspective of the general populace into saying, hey, look, we're surrounded by enemies. These people understand one thing and one thing only, that's power, sheer naked power, and we're going to have to go and throw our weight around so these people know not to mess with us. We don't think like that, but maybe one thing that would make it easier is saying, look, our army are all there because they want to be there. They know what they signed up for. They took the risks. They took the risk, and it's very sad when one of them dies, but it's just, the way the world is, and it's tragic. Victor Davis Hanson talks about the tragic view of the world. That doesn't mean sad. It just means acknowledging that, sometimes bad things happen and you have to deal with them. The opposite of being a Pollyanna. And we just don't have that. And one reason is because of the draft. Also, the draft is bad because for one other reason, you're in the army for 3 years. You have 7 months of training, counting boot camp, and then you're a soldier because you only have like 2 more years of actual duty. And 2 years of duty is not a lot, and 7 months of training is not a lot either. So you literally turn out soldiers who are barely have enough training.
Do you have a strong, like, do you have career military
Yeah, there
personnel?
are, but there actually are, but not as much of it is like combat units. Most of it is the leadership position, like a commissioned officer or a non-commissioned officer, which often they just work in the bureaucracy. So most of the career soldiers are not combat guys; they're clerks or bureaucrats or that type of stuff.
sure. But I mean, you're saying that these problems would go away if there was no draft?
No, I'm saying they probably wouldn't go away, but they would be easier to address. They would be much easier to address if there wasn't a draft, because then you can start from having like basically an army of high schoolers. Plus, it sounds like I'm being mean, but it isn't. I mean, most armies are young men. Army of high schoolers to having an army of professional soldiers. Because in every Israeli's mind, a soldier is a kid. Me included. I work on the bus. There's a lot of people who go on the bus, and I'm treating them like I would treat a high schooler with just a bit more of circumstances.
Well, that's probably a lot of money to set up a military like that as well.
Not really, because there's a lot of hidden unemployment in the army, and you have to keep recruiting people who have absolutely nothing to do, and the bureaucracy gets bloated. And honestly, most of the money goes on equipment anyways.
Well,
and you have to train people no matter what. So you just, yeah.
I want to get your take. Elon Musk had a quote agreeing with the notion that Jews had been involved with, stirring up anti-white sentiments as part of woke, and people called his tweet anti-Semitic. I, as a secular Jew, don't see it that way, but I was curious about your take.
I mean, yeah, it's just stupid.
I mean, but it's like acknowledging that Jews were involved in socialism, and some people want to call that anti-Semitic because Hitler seized on that. But I mean, part of the historical record is that's true.
I mean, yeah, it's factual, but you can look at the opposite. Jews were involved in capitalism, and Jews were involved in moderate, whatever, mixed
Right,
economy.
most intellectual movements.
So, but just pointing that out without the context is so misleading to border on the Stoles and willing the Stolson. Now, if the guy likes socialism, then it's pro-Semitic. If he doesn't like socialism, it's anti-Semitic. But it's very distorted either way, mostly because one, it's not true, and if you think that's positive or negative, that makes you bigoted, a positive bigot or a negative bigot. So,
but the idea that Jewish people have been, to the extent they've been involved with the left, they've, partially been involved with woke and the sentiment of having this anti-white mentality and part of being one of these, historically marginalized. But what they found after October 7th is that, in fact, the historically marginalized crew doesn't see them as nearly historically marginalized as the Palestinians that want to destroy them.
Imagine the surprise. I mean, it was kind of obvious, but
So what you're saying, Scott, is that the Palestinians are more marginalized, therefore they deserve more respect.
if
Well,
you're woke, yeah.
it's to some extent, I have seen historically marginalized as like a Nietzschean Superman, that they're beyond good and evil. It's the same sentiment that they can't be racist. And so it's this thing that whatever the Palestinians are doing because of these Israeli colonizers must be right.
Yeah.
And that's the sentiment that I think is behind much of the anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish take on the left.
It's kind of like they look at it as a Davy and Goliath situation or something, where like Israel is Goliath now, and they're just, and then the Palestinians are David. So
yeah, that's definitely it. I mean, to give you one example, one of the most anti-Israel countries in the world is Ireland, because get this, one of the largest parties in Ireland is called Sinn Féin, which what?
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Let's just say it outright. They used to be the political arm of the IRA. Now the IRA isn't there anymore because they figured Ireland has had independence for the past 100 years, and Northern Ireland doesn't is fine as things are. So honestly, their whole IRA narrative has gone down the tubes. But they need an underdog, and the underdog is the Palestinians. So it's kind of like a resurrection of this whole underdog narrative again. And a lot of Irish people fall for it by saying, "Oh yeah, the Israelis are the British, and the Palestinians are like the Irish, and they're fighting the occupier." Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of this. I think a lot of this, marginalization and wokeness, and all this like rooting for the underdog. I think it's all kind of a smoke screen. It's really what's going on is either some sort of racism or some sort of hatred of Western civilization, even because Israel is kind of like the Western country in the Middle East. So, the left hates anything having to do with Western civilization. So they got to hate Israel.
Kind of. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. There was a shift that happened in 1967, going back to this underdog thing. After the 6-Day War, Israel was no longer kind of the underdog because they had, taken Jerusalem.
Right.
And I also think the PLO organized themselves in a kind of Marxist way. I think.
So
the Secretary General position So
It
that
is
helped.
really good. And believe it or not, the third largest party in Gaza pre-Hamas was the People's Liberation Front, which is a
Right. They were very left wing.
yeah. Oh, hey, do you want to hear something funny?
Go ahead.
It's related, I promise. Okay, so in Arabic, they have a bunch of letters. They don't have a letter for P.
Okay.
Okay, it's like in Chinese, they don't have a letter way to say r, right?
All
Okay,
right.
or in English, there's no r. So if you want to say Palestine in Arabic, you can't. No, you really can't. You have to either say Palestine or Palestine because all the other letters, they just don't have a letter to put it in Arabic.
You'd
That's
think
why they
after
say, that's why
2,000
they
years, someone might have come up with something.
1,400 because actually, aren't the Arabs from the Arab Peninsula, which is kind of far away? Huh. Yeah, well.
That
So, what?
I've heard the
So
name
they
comes
so
from
they pronounce it
Philistines.
like an F, like a like a.
Yeah, they make it into an F, but sometimes they make it into a B. Really depends. In Gaza, it's like an F, but in the West Bank, it's like a B. Kind of. Not hard and fast. It's just how they speak in other languages. So, this whole idea that the native Palestinians, I'm like, well, look, if you're native, if this is your native land, why did you decide to call it in something you can't pronounce? No, it's literally that stupid. It's like, and I don't know why people don't mention it. Because
That must be some Western prejudice we've added.
I have no idea.
Maybe that's why they hate us so much. It's because we're pronouncing their country wrong.
No, we're pronouncing it right. They're the ones who can't pronounce it wrong. Who can't pronounce it wrong. That's the thing. Like, look, if this was really your country, why do you use your name for it? You can't pronounce it. Like, it's like if somebody would say China was called Reraria, but the Chinese don't have an R. Do you get what I'm saying? It's like that's stupid.
But
Yeah,
who
In
gave it
fact,
that
they want
name
the
in
name.
English?
What?
Who gave it that name though?
The British did, and they gave it that name because a long time ago, the Romans, when they kicked out the Jews from Judea, they wanted to call it Syria Palestina, which is named after the Philistines, who, by the way, they only know about because they're mentioned in the Bible
right.
as the Philistines, which are kind of a Greek-ish people before the. Never mind. So it's named after get this, it's named after a thing in English that was named after a thing in Latin that was named after a thing in Hebrew that was probably named after a thing in Greek. But that's neither here nor there.
Probably stole it from the Sumerians anyway. But
Oh,
be that as it may, with some of the remaining time we have left, I'm interested in a little of your origin story. We didn't start with it because of the Israel thing, but
hell
just
yeah.
your background, your travels.
I was bitten by a spider, and then my uncle. Oh, this crap. You know that one. Um,
He's a
no, no.
comedian, by the way.
I was born in Israel in '95. My dad's a diplomat, so we moved around a lot. One point, I lived in China. I was bar mitzvahed on the Great Wall. That
Wow.
was something. They threw candy on me. They didn't throw candy on me from the wall when I was down there, so I was okay. Um, what else? We got, when I was 18, I started getting into fitness. One point, I was the youngest certified fitness trainer in the country. I really got into Mike Menser and especially another guy who I think his name is Andrew Bay or Drew Bay
Sure.
as he goes by, who is a student of Menser.
He
I
was a
really got into
trainer of
Mike
mine
Menser.
25 years ago.
Wow, what a small world.
Weren't they into Ayn Rand? Is that how you found out about Rand?
Yeah, through Menser. I mean, I saw him give a speech explaining why high intensity training is proper. I was blown away. This is like if this guy would come down, he did a technique I would later know to be called vertical integration. But when he did it, I was blown away. This was like if some guy just came on stage and started using the force or something. Like, I mean, I was like, holy smolies, screw getting big muscles. This guy thinks good.
What?
And that I started reading. I mean, I read the books before, but they were interesting, but I didn't take them really seriously. In fact, I was so badly informed to think that Mike Menzer created the philosophy.
Okay. We pick up bits and pieces at first.
What?
Well, so what's the status of Ayn Rand in Israel? Are there a lot of objectivist groups?
I have no idea. I don't get involved with this.
None that interest you, anyway.
Because it never leads to anything. Like, well, what do? We sit around and talk all the time. Like, man, can't we just do that in a bar and talk about football? Like, it's gonna lead to the same thing.
Did
I
you
had an
start?
objectivist group. We met in a bar.
No, I mean, meeting in a bar is fine and all, but you reach these groups and like, so what are we doing? Well, we're just talking about this. I'm like, I mean, that's nice, but are we doing anything else? No. No, maybe they are doing something and I just haven't picked up on it, or maybe I'm not. I mean, I did get invited to something recently, but I
No,
forgot
I
what.
don't think you missed the big call for action.
No, I didn't, because if there was something to do with acts, I mean, there's a bunch of liberal, economically liberal people in Israel, and once we gathered on May 1st is a big, parade here for Workers' Day. It's
May
a real
Day, the
thing.
commie Labor Day.
Yeah, and it's actually a big holiday in Israel because this country has pretty socialistic roots, especially with the kibbutz.
Yeah.
Crap, I mentioned the kibbutz. There's
Any are the kibbutzes changing in response to October 7th?
no nothing. Well, they might actually get armed, hopefully, maybe, don't know. Look,
Okay.
here's the thing: Israelis don't arm themselves because everybody thinks, oh yeah, the nation will protect somebody else will protect me. So it's kind of like, the tragedy of the commons, but for security. And yeah, that could work. I mean, there were security, reinforcements who came on October 7th, but as we saw, it wasn't enough. So yeah.
Well,
But
I
you're
read
arming the
that.
most collectivized first.
What?
You seem to be arming the most collectivized first.
In a way, yeah. I mean, look, I cannot emphasize how collectivistic this Israeli society used to be, especially in the past, but still in the present. And those type of bureaucratic institutions that basically control everything are still around. That's one reason the corona here was so devastating to everyone.
Yeah.
I read that October 7th was the bloodiest day in Israeli history. I was wondering if how much of it will be a wake up call to the nation that everyone needs to protect themselves. Because I think terrorism in Israel before was mostly like bus bombings. Is that true?
Yeah, and I walk on the bus, and I'm freaking terrified every time I see somebody suspicious get on.
So there's not much you can do if a guy strapped with a bomb comes on your bus, right? But if there's a carload of jihadists wielding guns, you might be able to shoot at them. So I think maybe now that you've experienced October 7th, hopefully
Okay,
this
if
will.
there's a carload of jihadis, I'm not shooting them. I'm just running them over with a bus. That's a lot easier. No, really. Have you ever seen a bus hit a car? I mean, the
Yeah,
car.
no, it's probably your
You
best move if you have a bus available.
You
trust me,
need like
vehicular
some.
homicide beats out firearms any day of the week.
You need a missile loaded bus where you can like shoot missiles from your bus.
That would be swell. I'll tell that to the company I work for. We might do it. It might be a new hit. I mean, who wouldn't want to drive a bus with extra security?
It's good
Uh,
timing for it anyway.
uh, well, wait. To answer your question, what's going on in Israel is not an existential crisis because, yeah, a lot of people died. And okay, so there was this period from 2000 to 2005, which was called the Intifada, which is when terrorists around Israel, either from Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, even in, Israeli, majority Muslim Israeli settlement would just go about and do terror attacks quasi-independently of each other. And 2,500 people died then over 5 years, which is more than they died now. But it just registers differently because all of this happened at once, and all of the usual, psychological hand waving, you can't do it if it just happens at once, like you could in the Intifada. Even though I wasn't surprised. I mean, I know what jihad is. Like, jihad existed for 1,400 years, and people pretend like they discovered it. You could only discover it like a week ago. Dumb. But this is a moral crisis in Israel. It's not an existential crisis because honestly, Hamas can militarily they can't win. Okay,
But
so
they can turn global support against Israel, and
yeah,
at least
which is their plan, but I have no idea why, because the idea was always to create equivalency, but they just can't do that anymore, even unless you're the most crazy and ardent, jihad, Islamist or leftist or anti-Semite. You just can't do it anymore. Even Sweden, who was probably the biggest supporter of Palestine, has decided to completely cut off funding from it. Even the EU decided to say, "Well, we're done here." So Hamas threw away 30 years of PR in one day
we'll
because
see. We'll see if they
no, they might
don't
get
get
it
it
back,
back.
but it's not. They might get it back, but it's looking less likely by the day because they have hostages, and they're too, stupid to say, look, we can either release the hostages and work on a PR, or we can keep a strong calling card and avoid the consequences. So, in my opinion, they're just too cowardly to decide if they want this or that.
Well, nobody has ever accused them of being geniuses at warfare, I don't
No,
think.
they're not geniuses in warfare, but they're geniuses in PR. I mean, you have the BBC freaking eating out of their hand.
So
Yeah,
we're
one of those things you hear on the media is that Gaza is an open air prison, and that seems to gain a lot of sympathy for Hamas. What do you make of this rhetoric that Gaza is an open air prison and it's Israel's fault for, you know,
Well, the first thing to tell these people is, look, Gaza has a border with Egypt, and the Egyptians want as much less to do with them than the Israelis do. So, it's like saying, well, I don't know, let's just think of two countries. Honduras, not known as the nicest country, Mexico has a pretty strict border policy with them. And so do all of their other neighbors. Does that make Honduras an open prison? It's ridiculous on the face of it. Like saying because ridiculous on the face of it, like they can't have autonomy and then have one of the worst governments, the de facto governments imaginable, and then be surprised that nobody wants anything to do with them.
right.
but also Israel isn't, prisons have prison guards and wardens and, all sorts of, ways to control the prisoners in the prison. And as far as I know, that's not the case in Gaza.
Yeah, well, it is the case, but that the case is for Hamas, but Hamas is the government, so you can just say, well, look, it's just a run-of-the-mill dictatorship. It's like saying North Korea is an open-air prison. I mean, yeah, but, well, it is. But what does that
And
have to do with Israel? I mean, it's completely self-inflicted at this point.
even if there are, border crossing checks, I mean, one of them goes to Egypt. So, it's up to it's at least as much Egypt's fault. They could let all the Palestinians in there if they wanted,
No.
except
The Egyptians and the Jordanians made it very clear any displacement of people would mean they're going for a war. Now, that sounds very fair and nice, but in reality, it means, yeah, if they come here, we're just shooting. We don't want them here in any circumstances. It's a very nice way of saying, get the heck out. No, it's a very nice way of saying, not in my neighborhood.
right, let the Israelis deal with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how it's kind of the opposite of how, Texas has been sending refugees into New York. Kind of the
Right.
opposite of that.
Well,
And
go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say.
I'm sorry for interrupting your train of thought. I just really appreciate your insights.
Open prison. I wanted to say that's not true. I just check. I happen to know this. I tried to apply for like what do you call it? For some bureaucratic thing with the American embassy, And there they ask you, okay, are you from Gaza? So you'll need like you know, clearance in order to visit the embassy in Jerusalem. And that's the thing. So, you know, there are ways to get out of it. And since there's so many Gazans living outside of Gaza, that's kind of not true. It's simply a country with one of the worst migration relationships in the world, which is pretty much earned, judging by their behavior.
Well, so what do you see? How does this thing resolve?
Wow. Man, I don't know. I'm going from being very hopeful to being very disappointed, very dismal about it. I mean, it's going good for one reason. People are actually serious about ending this. There are hostages, which is a reason for people to want to, you know, go get the job done. But on the other hand, the fact that they're hostages, they might just say, look, we'll release all the hostages and leave us alone. That might happen too. So that's a double-edged sword. But on the other hand, this is not a double-edged sword. This is just a bad-edged sword. I know this is just negative. There's Blinken sitting in the military HQ of Israel, and he's doing nothing but interfere.
Right.
All of it for American money. Also, the American money that's not going to come in the coming, recently because of the government shutdowns or whatnot in the U.S.
Biden's busy releasing money to Iran.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. I have one funny story I want to say.
Okay.
So this is about the American money Israel gets, and a lot of people, especially on, there was a big divide on the right in the U.S. between should we give money to Israelis or should we not? And I say you shouldn't, and I'll tell you why. There are always strings attached, and to exemplify this, I'll give an example with my grandma. So every time my grandma goes shopping, she's really tired. And she's really tired because she buys a lot of bags. And I ask her, Grandma, why are you buying so many bags? And says, oh, yeah, so I won't go to the supermarket again. And I'm like, why? You don't like it? No, it's just that I don't want to go again because every time I come back, my hands hurt and I'm tired. And why is that? And he says, well, it's because I buy a lot of stuff. So I won't go again. Do you get the loop? Do you get the loop that's created here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when it comes to the Americans, we kind of say, well, no, we need American money so we can have all of the weapons to protect ourselves and to fight the type of war they want us to fight, which is a very cautious type of war that doesn't involve civilians. So we'll get money from them so we can fight in a way so we can be in a situation where we need their money. Do you get what I'm saying?
Do you think that Israel would be able to fight its enemies if it had to purchase outright all of its weaponry?
Probably we could make them I don't know if people know this. 30% of all firearms, all handguns in the U.S. are made in Israel.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, for the bigger weapons, if you had to buy fighter jets and tanks and didn't have American support in military armor, would Israel be able to purchase all of that and finance the wars it needs to engage in?
I don't know if it would be the best, but it would definitely be better than what our enemies have. So there's that.
Yeah, I think if you had the will.
What?
America suffers from this same problem of not having the will to engage in total war. We're not willing to defeat our enemies until they have to surrender. And I think Israel has that same problem. There's all this pressure for tolerance and forgiveness and
clemency, magnanimity, all of those useless. Honestly, useless. So,
well, I really appreciate your insights, and maybe we'll have you back to talk about this as it unfolds. But William, any final thoughts?
I just want to thank you, Leo, for coming on the podcast and giving us, all this information. It's very helpful to understand your perspective. And there's also this argument about innocence in war.
The only innocents in war are dissidents.
Yeah, I agree. I think anyone, and Ayn Rand kind of mentioned this too, and I'll just briefly quote her. She was asked about, like if there are innocent people who don't like the government in the Soviet Union, should we be concerned about them? And this kind of applies to this situation, I think, with Israel and Hamas. Um, she said that the question assumes that an individual inside a country should be made secure from the social system under which he lives and that he accepts, willingly or unwillingly, because he hasn't left the country, and that others should respect his rights and succumb to aggression themselves. This is the position of the goddamn pacifists who won't fight, even if attacked, because they might kill innocent people. If this were correct, nobody would have to be concerned about his country's political system. But we must care about the right social system because our lives depend on it. Because a political system, good or bad, is established in our name and we bear the responsibility for it. End quote. I think the people in Gaza have accepted their savage overlords, the Hamas, and they deserve what they get. And if there are any innocent people in there, they are the dissidents who don't like their country, and they've had time to get out, and now they're stuck in a bad situation.
Yeah, I
Great.
agree.
That's a great insight to end on. Thanks so much, Lio, for joining us. Thanks to everyone who joined and listened. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.